Hi, I'm Owen Canfield with the opinion page at the Oklahoman. I'm joined today by Mike McNutt for our weekly recap of goings-on at the state capitol. Mike, thank you for being here today.
Sure.
The big news this week, of course, the budget.
Yeah.
Bad news. Originally the number was $600 million in the hole. It looks like now it's going to be closer to $900 million. What was the reaction out at the Capitol, and where do they go from here to try to make that up?
Well, the reaction was expectations. They knew that oil and gas prices are low, have remained low. There's no hope in the horizon near future that they're going to go up.
Right.
And so much of the economy is based on oil and gas, the gross production tax on oil and gas. So it was the kind of bad news you hope you don't get, but be a realist, they knew it was coming.
Sure.
Right now, no one wants to react. They just now have started the budget process. A big event will be Tuesday when the Equalization Board meets at the Capitol, and they will certify the actual amount that the legislature will have to spend in the 2010 fiscal year.
Right.
The good news is that $900 million is the budget short hole, as they like to call it. It looks like it actually be about $600 million because the state's got about $150 million in cash reserve and about another $100 million of other cash, and then they have governors propose some savings, do some purchasing. So you might be able to deduct $300 million from that $900 million. But it is the reality. The revenue for the state for the upcoming fiscal year is about $610 million less
than a year ago.
Than this fiscal year we're in.
The one
now.
we're in now.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be a challenge. The governor has talked about surgical cuts. He has so far said he will not dip into the rainy day fund. In time, that may well change, but right now he's standing pretty firm on that, isn't he?
Yeah, he and the legislative leaders also agree that the rainy day fund, the state savings account, which has about $600 million, not quite 10% of the budget, but it's a healthy amount.
Right.
They don't want to get into that savings account because 2011 fiscal year could be even worse if oil and gas prices remain flat.
Sure.
So you don't want to spend your savings account now and then next year when you really need it, you don't have it. So they're going to look at, the governor's budget that he proposed was a balanced budget, and it was about $100 million less than this fiscal year. But he didn't have any cuts for education, transportation, public safety, or health care. It looks like he's going to have to make some cuts in those areas, and they're hoping they don't have to cut any employees. That will be the real touchy point. I mean, it's one thing to cut programs or stall some projects, but no one wants to see anyone lose their job. The state treasurer, the governor's chief budget advisor, Scott Meacham, hopes that they can maybe eliminate job positions through attrition, unfilled positions, just don't fill them, but hopefully not people. Right. But too early to tell right now, looking that far down. We'll know better about 2 or 3 months.
A couple topics that popped up this week. It was in the paper this morning. The legislature basically said, do what you want with the Guantanamo Bay prisoners, just don't bring them here.
Yeah, we do. Not in our backyard.
Is that really just a symbolic thing? I mean, isn't that a federal decision?
Right. It's a non-binding resolution, and other states have done the same thing. It basically puts on the record that we don't want these detainees.
Sure.
And it really doesn't mean anything because the president or Congress will have the ultimate decision, and they'll decide what's the best for security purposes and what state's better prepared.
And certainly our congressional delegation has already weighed in with the same message. Yeah, thank you, but no thank you.
And it was interesting. It was about an hour debate.
Right.
And it was an opportunity for some to say, hey, we're patriotic. We don't want these terrorists here. And they spent they spent 15 minutes debating. The resolution had one page had detainees, like Guantanamo Bay, and the next page had terrorists. So one representative said we should be consistent, either call them detainees or terrorists, which brought the response, were you watching television on September 11th?
Sure.
So they finally just said, let's call them terrorists.
Right.
And, but they don't want them here. Interestingly enough, some legislators said, well, Oklahoma's always answered the country's charge, whether it's, the soldiers going off to war or anything that the country's asked Oklahoma to do, they've done. And they said, look, this is a big, vital mission for the country to hold these detainees so they have a trial or military proceedings. So some states got to do it. Let's do our part.
Interesting. Something not quite as dangerous, puppies and kittens that are maltreated, mistreated. There was a bill offered this week and passed out of committee that would deal with puppy mills and kitten mills in Oklahoma. Tell us just a little bit about that bill and where you think that may end up.
Well, this is a bill that's proposed by Representative Lee Denny from Cushing, and she's a veterinarian.
Right.
She proposed a similar measure last year. It didn't get past the House committee. This year, they've refined it a little bit. Basically, anyone who sells more than 25 animals,
right,
mainly dogs or cats,
sure,
a year, would have to get a license.
Right.
And they would be subject to annual inspections by the State Department of Agriculture.
Right.
Breeders now, there's about 700 breeders in the state,
right,
who are registered
with
through
the
different clubs,
USDA, right?
And with USDA.
Right.
And once a year, USDA inspectors come in and look at their facilities. Unfortunately, the best estimates are there could be as many as 2,100,
right,
possibly more,
right,
substandard,
sure,
or what we call puppy mill, kitten mill operations across
right,
the state. And that's what they're really trying to crack down. And most of them appear to be in rural areas.
Right.
Most cities have animal control officers,
right,
and so they have a pretty good handle.
Well,
on
it's a
what's
problem.
going on.
There's no question
Yeah.
about it, and we think it's a good effort to try to clean that up and have a little bit less of this out in Oklahoma. It's a bad situation for these dogs.
It passed pretty handily in committee. It goes now to the House floor. The concerns a couple of members had was the Fourth Amendment, search and
right,
seizure.
Sure.
What right are you giving up when someone comes in and searches your
yeah.
property? But the example was made, if you have a restaurant, you have a license with the health department.
Right.
And as part of that licensing procedure, you're saying, I'm subject to inspection.
Sure.
We all want to have safe food.
Sure.
So if you're going to raise animals for your occupation
right.
or hobby,
prove you're doing it right.
you need to be licensed. So as part of the exchange, come on in and make sure we're doing it right. And especially people who buy these dogs and cats.
Right.
There's been stories in this committee hearing how breeders will get certificates of health from veterinarians for a dog or a puppy or a kitten. Then they change it, swap it with an unhealthy puppy or kitten.
Sure.
You go on the internet, you don't know where you're buying these
right.
dogs or cats from. Or you go to the supermarkets or any type of shopping center parking lot, and you'll see dogs for sale, cats for sale. And you don't know the health of these animals. And
right.
people will spend hundreds of dollars for
what they think is a great animal, right? And it's not.
And it's not, or else it's sick.
Sure.
And they'll spend thousands of dollars on trying to
make it well.
Make
sure.
it well, and sometimes the dog is so sick with some
yeah.
disease that they have to put it down.
One last issue I want to touch on. You wrote about it today briefly. The idea of there's a bill out there that would, if you were arrested, you would have to be subject to a DNA sample. Tell us quickly about that and where that stands.
Yeah, this is they call it the Julie Buskin law, and was named after Julie Buskin, who was murdered
right.
several years ago down in Norman. It took a long time, 8 years, I believe, to get her assailant and finally captured and
right.
Convicted. The idea is that right now state law says that if you're convicted of a felony,
right.
that you then surrender and give up a DNA test,
sure,
DNA sample, and then that's put on the national crime data system.
Right.
And so anywhere, any officer, any law enforcement agency then can check those DNA samples.
But that's with someone who's been convicted.
Been convicted.
And this one would start it at the front end when you were arrested, is that right?
Arrested on felonies.
On a felony.
That serve 85% law.
But arrested only, not even charged,
right,
and not convicted.
Arrested for murder, rape, manslaughter,
Interesting.
Child abuse. And that was a concern that a couple of members who voted against it said, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Sure.
And so what do you do if you're arrested and DNA samples taken out and
later the charges are dropped or not
you're
filed
found
at all?
innocent, then that person has to file and pay money to
wow.
get the DNA sample removed from the national DNA database.
Right.
So,
well, it'll be an interesting bill to watch. It
yeah.
sounds like, because it's one that would get, I'm sure, civil libertarians excited, and sure to draw some serious debate before it's all said and done.
Yeah, it's emotional sides on both issues because
right.
Obviously, someone who commits a horrible crime and leaves DNA evidence behind, and if you're able to catch that person as soon as possible,
right.
let's say an arrest,
sure.
well, you might save another
right.
crime from occurring. But then you have the civil rights question. Our country's based on you're innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
And what rights does a person give up
right.
When they're just arrested? And sometimes, people are arrested and let go.
Sure.
Just because they're in the
vicinity,
scene or
right.
they're,
right.
some reasonable idea that they may be, connected to this crime.
Well, interesting stuff as always, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week. And we ask you to please continue reading in the Oklahoman and watching here on News OK TV.